Good morning and welcome to Tiger's Great Journey Read Aloud. We are continuing on in our story of Tiger's Great Journey and we are starting chapter 10, Do What is Right. Tiger was in his room looking through his list of requirements for his next promotion, Assistant School Leader 3, which comes before the second and the first. He was excited to find out what new challenges awaited him. As he looked over the list, he saw that he had to actively serve as a senior class leader for 2 months. He knew that class leaders had specific duties to fulfill once they earned that rank, and he made a mental note to review them. The second item on the list of requirements was to show his assistant school leader that he understood the Black Belt Shoka leadership trait of justice by settling a disagreement between two or more students. Tiger made a mental note to take this on as his first leadership task at his new rank. Not long afterwards, Sensei was discussing disagreements in class. Tiger thought this was a great opportunity to gain some insight on how to settle a disagreement. He raised his hand to ask a question. Sensei, if two people have different ideas about what is right, how am I to determine who is correct? Sensei said, that's a good question, Tiger. In any situation, you must use your training and your resources. For instance, if you and Kevin are working on Teki Shodan and you tell Kevin that he is doing a technique incorrectly and he doesn't agree, there are several ways to settle the disagreement. You can discuss it and possibly come to an agreement about how the technique should be done. That would be called using your training. You could check your handbook to find the answer. That would be using a resource. Or you can ask me and I can explain. That's also using a resource. Tiger thought about this answer, and it seemed to him that it was a good solution for a lot of disagreements that might arise. When he thought his sister had done something wrong, he could talk to his mom or dad. When he had a disagreement with a classmate at school, he could talk to his teacher. But then he thought about what happened when disagreements were really big. He raised his hand again. Sensei looked at Tiger and nodded. Sensei, what about when people get in a fight or when countries go to war? Sensei looked at the students for several moments. This question of fighting and war is a very serious question and has been with mankind for a long, long time. It is unfortunate, but many people still think that it's okay to attack other people when they disagree with them. It is much better to learn how to talk respectfully to other people when you disagree with them. This way we can settle our differences peacefully without fighting or resorting to war. Sensei then asked, who has heard of justice? Several students raised their hands again. Sensei nodded to Kevin, who said through a giggle, there's the Hall of Justice for superheroes. Sensei smiled. How about a serious answer? Tiger raised his hand and Sensei nodded. I've heard about the Hall of Justice where they take people who commit crimes, Tiger said. Good, said Sensei. Let me give you a definition. Justice is fairness. It is doing what is right in the right way. Justice is about ending conflict and mediating disputes or finding the middle ground. Stacy raised her hand and Sensei nodded. So it seems like settling a disagreement is about finding justice or fairness, she asked. Yes, or sometimes it is as simple as finding a solution that both parties can agree to, even if it is not what they wanted, Sensei said. Well, this has been an important discussion, but it's time to end the class. Tiger stood up and walked to the first position in the line and took his place. He was the highest ranking student in class, which meant that he would lead the class in the meditation and the bow out ceremony. All the other students in Tiger's class and the following class lined up according to rank. Sensei kneeled and Seiza. Tiger gave the command, Seiza, and the class sat down in the sitting, kneeling position. Then with the command, Moksao, the class members cleared their minds and emptied them of all thought. Tiger then announced, Moksa Yame, and the class stopped meditating. Next was the dojo creed. Tiger gave the commands and the rest of the class repeated them after him. Seek perfection of character, be faithful, endeavor, respect others, and refrain from violent behavior. Shomani Rei, they all bowed to the front, honoring the masters who had gone before them and done so much to prepare their ground for training. Sensei turned to face the class. Sensei ni Rei, the class bowed to Sensei. Sensei looked at the students, stood up, and signaled to them to stand. The students rose and bowed again. Then Sensei told them that they were free to go. With that, the students bowed again and left the training floor. Tiger thought to himself, that went pretty well. I remembered all the commands, and this is one of the requirements for my next test. As Tiger walked over to where he had placed his gear bag, he was still thinking about disagreements and justice. Tiger thought about the dojo creed, refrain from violent behavior, and how that had a lot to do with stopping conflict and settling disputes. He felt he had a better understanding of how to settle a disagreement now than he had before the class had started. The words of the dojo creed were once again revealing new insights and lessons to him. There must be truth to what Sensei had once said. The dojo creed, like kata, kihon, and kumite, had a unique ability to reveal truths, teach lessons, and expand your understanding of what you are capable of and how you can become a black belt Shoka leader. Tiger had had a busy day. First, he had gone to school, then to the dojo to train, next home for dinner, and finally had gone and done his homework. He sat down in a comfortable chair and looked forward to continuing his great journey. Tonight was different, though. He felt a strange sense of foreboding. He opened the book of the empty mind and began to dream. And here we're moving on to the scales of justice. I don't know if you can see that, but we have Tiger and Blake on either end of the scale. Tiger heard Blake calling in the distance. Tiger, where are you? The swirling snow had made it hard for Tiger to see. He raised his hands in front of his face, and the stinging of the snow abated somewhat. He began to walk toward Blake's voice and called out to him. It was hard to tell if he was getting nearer or farther away from Blake. Then he heard Blake call from nearby. Tiger turned and saw him come into view through the swirling snow. They were both happy to see each other and hugged with pure joy. Blake asked Tiger where they were. Tiger wasn't sure, but he had a feeling they would soon find out. Tiger said, "Let's get moving," and the boys headed off into the snowstorm. After they had been hiking for an hour or so, the storm settled to a light snowfall, and the two boys could finally see where they were headed. There was a canyon in the distance that appeared to be a good place to find shelter. As they neared the pass and began moving into the canyon, the light grew dim, and the mountains closed in around them. Tiger and Blake both needed a rest. They had been traveling for a long while, so they decided to stop, to rest and eat. They found a sheltered area and made themselves as comfortable as possible. Blake took hardtack from his pack and passed a large piece to Tiger. After eating, they drank from the clear stream that ran through the canyon. The boys resumed their journey. As they turned a corner, they saw a huge scale. It looked like one that Tiger had seen in an antique store he had visited with his mom not long ago. However, it was enormous. On each of the plates that hung from the beam were 20 life-size figures. Along the top of the scale, the word justice was carved into the stone. The boys walked towards it, amazed by its sheer size. Excuse me. As they drew closer, they could see staircases which wound up the rock wall near each plate. Tiger felt nervous. Blake asked, "What do you think it is?" Tiger wasn't sure. Blake started to climb the staircase. Something told Tiger this was a bad idea. He asked Blake to stop, but Blake kept climbing. When he had reached the top, Tiger begged him again to stop, but Blake said, "There's nothing but a bunch of old statues of knights and kings." Blake stepped onto the closest metal plate. At first, nothing happened, and then ever so slowly, the scales began to tip with Blake's plate moving downward, and with the tipping came a cracking sound as the figures began to glow red and then to move. Tiger yelled to Blake to jump, but as Blake turned to head back to the staircase, a knight thrust his lance out to block him. A voice bellowed, "Who dares to disturb the scales of justice? You have stepped into a fight that is eternal, the fight for justice, and you have upset the balance. Now there will be war." Suddenly, a loud boom echoed through the canyon. The knights had raised their lances and were driving them down hard onto the platform. Simultaneously, the foot soldiers crashed their swords against their shields. When Tiger thought it couldn't get any louder, the noise doubled. To his dismay, he saw that the army on the other scale was also very much alive and brandishing weapons. These figures were glowing blue and glaring down at the red army that Blake had inadvertently joined. The clashing of metal against metal grew deafening. The Red King cried, "Silence!" And suddenly all was quiet, the running water. Then the Blue King spoke. "Red Army, why have you disturbed the balance? You know the consequences when justice is not kept in balance. There will be war." Tiger could see that the situation was quickly getting out of hand. He didn't know what to do, but thought that maybe he could try to calm the situation. In his most powerful voice, Tiger said, "Excuse me, Your Highness." It was suddenly silent again as all eyes turned to Tiger. A bolt of uncertainty shot through him. "Who are you?" Red and Blue King said as one. "I am Tiger. I'm on a journey to become a black belt Shoka leader, and my friend Blake is accompanying me." "Leave us," the Red King said. "We have a battle to wage so that the scales of justice may be balanced. One or more of us must be sacrificed for the sake of justice." At that moment, a staircase appeared, connecting the two sides of the scale. The red knights raised their lances and the red soldiers held their swords as they turned to face the inevitable onslaught from the blue army. Tiger sensed that the situation had gone from bad to worse, so he took matters into his own hands. As fast as he could move, Tiger ran up the staircase to the side of the blue army. Because the scales had tipped, he had to make a mighty leap to reach the platform, and as he landed, Tiger ki-eyed as loud as he could. Once again, all eyes turned to Tiger, and very slowly the scales started to move back into balance. A look of confusion passed across the faces of the two armies. The Blue King spoke first. "What have you done? You have denied us our honor. The scales have been tipped. Justice must be served, but now we don't know what to do because although the scales are back in balance, we cannot return to our restful state. There are too many people on the scales. We must eliminate one from each side." At that, the nearest knight grabbed Tiger. The Red King spoke. "I agree, justice has not been served. Tradition says that we must fight until we are at our original number. I demand battle." With that, all of the soldiers beat their shields. Tiger sensed that he must act or all would be lost. He cleared his throat and began to speak. "A fight without reason does not serve justice. My sensei says that a peaceful warrior is one who has great skill but does not need to fight, because he has learned there is no winner in a fight where even one person gets hurt." The kings looked at Tiger and seemed to be getting even angrier. He pressed on. "I don't know why you have battled in the past, but perhaps you can solve the problem before you without a battle today." The two kings looked at each other with great distaste, but Tiger could see that they were thinking hard. Neither king seemed to want to speak first, but finally the Blue King said, "The sands of time have hidden from us the reason that we choose to fight. I just know that it has always been so." "I too have searched my thoughts," said the Red King, "and I cannot recall why we have such great animosity for each other. It has always been this way." Tiger saw a glimmer of hope and slowly eased out of the grasp of the knight who held him. "Sensei has taught me that there is no justice in a fight which has no purpose. If you will allow me and my friend to leave in peace, it would serve justice better than to have us come to harm." The Red King looked at Tiger and said, "You have shown much bravery today. You leapt into a battle that you had no part of to save a friend. You brought the scales back into balance. You have shared wisdom with all of us. But how do you propose to return us to our slumber? There are still too many to keep us in balance." Tiger looked at the king and said, "If you will allow my friend and I to step off the scales together, your numbers will be restored, and you will return to your slumber." The two kings looked at each other. Then the Blue King tipped his scepter to show his agreement. He then turned to Tiger and told him, "Take your leave of us as we are weary from the ages and the battles we have fought to keep the scales of justice in balance. We will try this new approach." Tiger looked at Blake. The knight raised his lance to clear Blake's path to the stairs. Tiger nodded to Blake to signal that they should step off the scales at the same time. For a moment, the two armies stood looking at the boys. They looked very tired. Suddenly, there was a flash of purple light as the two armies merged together and then disappeared. Tiger and Blake stood looking at the empty scales. They didn't know what had happened, but they had the sense that the two armies had found peace. Later, they consulted their map and found the word justice, and a dove with the scales of justice in its beak. When he saw this, Tiger realized a truth that had escaped him until now. Peace is the result of justice being served. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you next time.